Hi there and welcome to the video. We're going to look at another game by Magnus Carlsen played at the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. And like I mentioned in the previous video, the players play a 4-game mini-match, rapid games. And here in the second round, we're going to look at the second game between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, where Magnus Carlsen has the black pieces. And again, he employed the French defense. So curious to see what he plays against what Niemann played. Against Anish Giri, it was the advanced variation. Niemann actually won the first game. This was game number 2. Niemann won the first game and then had an interview where he said that the chess speaks for itself. He then proceeded to lose the remaining 3 games, and this was the first game in the comeback of Magnus Carlsen in this mini match. So Niemann played e4 and the French by Magnus e6, d4, d5, and knight to d2, the Tarrasch variation. Very solid way to play for white. I've usually been playing knight f6 here. I have in the past played both c5 and bishop e7, even d takes e4. So there are a number of moves here. I want to try to play c5 again, which is what Magnus played, and this is also what Anish Giri is recommending in his Chessable course for black. This is a very solid line, and probably what the best are playing these days against the Tarrasch. Now Niemann played knight g to f3. The main move is e takes d5. And in fact, after c takes d4 as played by Magnus, we can still transpose to these lines where we take on d5. And black usually takes with the queen. And yeah, it's a different line, solid line for black. But Niemann went with knight takes d4, which is a common move as well, but the e takes d5 lines are more popular, and I think probably considered more critical. In any case, knight c6 was played here by Magnus. Knight f6 is also a move. Again, I think we're following what Giri is recommending. Bishop b5, pinning the knight. Bishop d7, protecting it because it was attacked twice. And now white takes on c6 and plays bishop d3. And the setup that Magnus plays here, I quite like, where you put the bishop on d6 and then you put the knight on e7. You stay solid and you sort of avoid, any problems connected with e5 because you don't have a knight on f6 to worry about. e5 was still played by Niemann, and now bishop c7. Castles, and Magnus went with c5, increasing his central scope with the pawns and intending to improve this bishop. And we remember in the game against Giri, this bishop was quite a strong piece on this long diagonal. c4 by Niemann, trying to break up the central pawns. Knight to f3. Magnus took on c4. Opens off with the bishop. He does accept this slightly weak pawn here, but the e5 pawn is also weak. Magnus now castled. And this position has been reached once before, and in that game white went with bishop d3. Niemann went bishop e3. And that's probably not a good move, because it seems that black can sort of get a good position by force by taking on f3, which is what Magnus did. Queen takes f3 and bishop takes e5. So we get this pawn on e5 and white gets the pawn on c5. So the pawns are equal, but white does have the bishop pair. So if white would be able to consolidate here, he would have the better position because it's an open position and we have the bishop pair. However, there are some problems. Problem number 1 is the hanging pawn of b2 in some lines, and problem number 2 is these bishops are vulnerable here on the c file. And indeed, queen c7 highlights that weakness. Now Magnus could have also played. He could also have played bishop takes h2 here, which looks very nice. If you take, then I will give this check, take up the bishop, and I'll be up a pawn. If king h1, I can retreat here. It looks scary because of the pin, but because I can unpin with a check here, next move will be probably after king g1, queen e7, and we play this ending up a pawn. But queen c7, also a good move. Niemann took on e7, and queen takes e7, and still the problem remains here. Even though white defends now, queen e2, queen c7, and this is very annoying. We can, of course, protect h2 as Niemann did, but now we can take a b2, and now we see why it was important to get the queen to c7 with tempo. If you take on b2, I take on c4. So Niemann elects to keep the bishops on. Plays rook b1. He could have taken on b2, of course. And the question is if he should have played that ending. Maybe, maybe not. Opposite colored bishops very often give, some drawing chances, but also they very often mean that the side that has the initiative is much better because it can attack on a color complex that you can't defend. Queen e4, queen d6 defending the bishop, king g2. Magnus is more or less just consolidating here. Bishop e3. We have a trade of one pair of rooks. And then Magnus is quite happy to put stuff on the c-file, and he's happy to trade queens. And he's happy to do that because white will be very tight down. We see the strong move g5. This bishop is sort of lacking space. Well, scope, let's say, rather than space, because you can't go to d5. It's hard to protect this square, and the black pawn is coming to g4. And that's what happens here. And with the pawn on g4, we can play rook f3 and target this pawn on f2, which is very difficult to defend. And that means that Niemann is now stuck with a very passive rook, and he's sort of in a zugzwang. And in the moves that follow, white is stuck just defending this pawn with the king and the rook. So what black can do is improve his position to the maximum, and that's what Magnus does. a5, move the pawn more forward, bring the king to the center, move the pawns forward, grab the space with the pawns. So king d6, king e2, e5, bishop d4, slightly more scope for the bishop, e4, and bring the king. White, of course, can do nothing but wait, and that's what he does. But now black has sort of maximized the power of his position. He's taken all the space he can get with the pawns. He centralized the bishop. He brought the king to the center. Still has this rook that's pinning white down. And I guess the only move that improves the position would maybe be to move the pawn forward. But maybe you also want to have this square available for the rook, the a3 square. So here Magnus feels it's time to strike, and he plays e3. Like I said, he improved the position to the maximum, and now he's trying to break through. And king f2 is kind of forced because otherwise the pawn on g3 drops. But now we see that the threat of discovery by the bishop with the king lined up here is pretty bad for white, and no square is safe for the bishop. If you go here, check here, here, check here, here, check here, and here we just take it. So bishop h5 is the only move that doesn't lose the bishop, but then king g5, and now there's no square for the bishop. Here we have this check, so we have to protect the bishop. And now Magnus moves in, he gives a check, and king g2 has to be played to protect the rook. Otherwise we could play rook here. If we play rook h7 now, then the bishop moves. So king g2 is forced, but now the rook moves in, rook e2. And before taking on a2, Magnus gives a check and then takes on a2. And yeah, nothing to be done here. He's going to land a check here. If you move the rook up, I can even just win this pawn. And everything is dropping. So a very smooth technique there by Michael Jordan. Very smooth technique there by Magnus Carlsen. And he was able to win this mini match against Hans Niemann, despite losing the first game with the white pieces. So Magnus in seemingly good form in this tournament, and we'll keep watching and we'll see what happens. Praggnanandhaa has also been doing well, and we'll keep an eye on these all these mini matches and hope to get some interesting games to show you. So stay tuned.